As I was standing there waiting to go on, a sudden memory came to, a certain nervousness you're about to do something like this. And I remember the first reading I ever did, and this is in terms of masculinity, my brother and my father in Newry Arts Centre way back in the early 80s. And my father came in having had a few drinks, having had a good few drinks to fortify himself for this, and sat against the back wall and fell asleep and started to snore loudly. And I asked my brother afterwards how I did, and he said, well, it's like this one. You sound as if you were so nervous, you sound as if you were standing on top of a washing machine on full spin. So masculinity, I think one of the things actually runs through all your work is fondness and humour. And one of the things that I noticed kind of reading through your work in the kind of the rigorous way is that the kind of nature, just to talk about the masculinity end of the thing, the fondnesses that run through it, but they're expressed in gestures. I was thinking, I don't know if you're familiar with the Robert Hayden poem, I think That Winter Morning it's called, where the poet it talks about his father, who obviously he didn't have a good relationship with, but realising later in life, his father would get up in the blue, black cold in the morning, light the fire before he went to work, and his hands cracked with hard work, raising his family. And the final line is, what did I know of love's, what is it nearly? Austere and lonely offices. So it comes through in all these guys' work. Maybe I can start with you, Raphael, because you talk about, I don't know if it's autobiographical or not, but about your father, presumably your father, saving to buy your luggage to come to Europe in 10 installments, and then you reciprocating by sending him back the money to pay his health insurance. Do you want to talk about that?
The experience of writing the Migrant Dictionary and the character Ulysses that appears there, like there is a lot of relationship with his father, and which very much autobiographical in that extent. Because when I came to Ireland, my father indeed bought me the luggage that I brought here. And I think that, as you were saying, while you were talking about this poem, I remembered one poem by Raymond Carver, where he's talking about his father, and he says that my father always wanted to be brave, but his eyes betrayed him. And I think that's so lovely. And when I read that poem for the first time, I kind of looked back at a relationship with my father, and I could reevaluate that relationship through that poem, through that lenses. And I think that these type of gestures, as you said, that perhaps the relationships between men and fathers and sons are often broken, language is broken, but there's some gestures there that when we reevaluate these relationships, these gestures often have some meaning. That's the way these parents, these men know how to demonstrate love, I think.
Yeah. I'd like to ask you to read a poem. I'm going to ask everybody to read a poem just to give you a sense of the work.
Yeah. I'm going to read this poem indeed, actually. This is the first poem of the pamphlet, and it's called Arrive. So, arrive, verb. 1. To reach a place, especially at the end of our journey. As in, Ulysses arrived at the airport and walked up to the terminal as a gust struck his dark-skinned face. He had prayed for 16 hours, asking the gods to make his motor cortex understand that in this land, push means push, while in his land, pull means push. But it came to nothing, as his hands forced the double doors that never gave in. 2. Of an event, to happen or start to exist. When the time arrived, after the moon had rotated more times than he could bother to count, Ulysses packed the luggage his father had paid for in 10 installments because a truck driver can only spare so much of his salary. 3. To reach a place or decision. To arrive on that continent, Ulysses worked shifts of 10 hours from Monday to Saturday. On Sundays, he would sell slices of carrot cake whose lemon glaze made him relieve his mother's bed sheets flapping above the blue and violet geraniums. 4. To achieve success. To wire 100 euros to his father on a day with a good conversion rate would mean his father's health insurance payment, would mean Ulysses had arrived.
Good, thank you, Raphael. again, sort of sticking with that idea of kind of fathers and sons and relationships between men. Matthew used the lovely poem with the handing over of the six goose eggs. Are they kind of Can you tell me about that? To kind of give that a bit of context.
Yeah, so that was actually a friend's dad. It wasn't actually my dad.
Okay.
Yeah. It's kind of like one of the guys I used to work with. His dad keeps geese, and I don't know if I don't even know if he sold the eggs or if he just kept them, and handed them out to friends and family, or whatever. But it was just like a hobby of his. But that there poem you're talking about, there's a little bit of a tenderness to it, which kind of, whenever something like that is happening between an older man and a younger man like that, in a certain type of part of Carrick, shall we say, in the north, it's kind of like an unstated kind of tenderness. It's sort of like just ephemeral and wrap them up nicely so they don't break.
Yeah, you wouldn't necessarily express love, but I mean, it is a very tender, tender gesture. Would you like to read there from?
Should I read that one?
Well, read that one, yeah.
Okay. Trying to remember where it is here. So I'm glad that someone's asked me to read something. So the book is basically set during a single 12-hour night shift in a plastic molding factory, based on my own experience. So it's kind of, I think of it as like one long book-length poem in time-stamped sections. So it's nice when someone, it's hard to pick something out to read, so it's nice when someone actually asks you to read something from it specifically. Okay, so this is 29 minutes past midnight. Once, all around me, delusions of understanding, a diagram of geese hatching ideas, then a scribble of rain. My workmate's dad sold his own eggs. That was his hobby. Good for hangovers, he said. Telling me to be gentle, he gave me 6 green goose eggs bound neatly in a flannel.
That's lovely, yes. Thank you. Charles, I'm kind of sort of picking up some of your poems, Boys, isn't it? And the final lines of it, which I wrote. I mean, there's a kind of vocabulary of masculinity which runs through, particularly familiar to me. You guys both with kind of sort of northern or Scottish backgrounds, of that idea of sort of people who artifice, who make things, kind of that. But I just did the last 4 lines of that poem really stuck in my head, of the idea of mates, the idea of boys, the idea of sort of male friendship, and maybe you could maybe elaborate in the last line of this. But still a boy can dream, so I imagine us in a tunnel at Hampden Park football stadium, crossing the threshold to the roar and feeling utterly hopeless. Hopeless.
I guess there's a sort of sense of hopelessness in the boys in the poem as a group of friends. But I guess in my mind at that time, which may have changed about a week or so ago, was that the idea of playing for Scotland was a hopeless endeavour. and that was also the dream being, I guess, in some way exactly that. And then when faced with reality, I liked and thought that might be realistic, that they would absolutely bottle it, and that. Being in some way related to how I understood or perceived the masculinity within the group, and the idea that I guess it was and is performed to some extent.
Yeah, I mean, there's something of in that. There's something elegiac in it about male friendship. Louise Gluck said that you live life once as a child, and all the rest is memory. I mean, I go home to my hometown and I meet the guys I went to primary school with, and we won the kind of under-12 county championship, Gaelic football championship. And for the photograph in the paper, I forgot to bring in my football shorts, so I'm wearing school trousers in front of the photograph, and it's still, you know, decades on, go, you ruined that effing photograph, Mac. You know? It's like, no.
I guess it is like that, you know, in terms of the boys in the poem, which are people in my life, are desperately trying to hold on to something that kept them together, and that being school or the playing football and that kind of thing, despite the fact that they're all living very different lives. And from my perspective, I was living even, you know, to them a really bizarre life by writing poems, and I guess I've tried to reflect that to some extent.
I mean, there's a lot of elegy in all your work, and it's very striking. Raphael, you have kind of lovely lines about you know, gay boys, and then growing up and becoming macho. You know, having to, or seeing themselves as having to become part of that structure again. Maybe you kind of talk about that.
Yeah. I think there's a certain culture in Brazil to this day that you can do certain things when you're a child or an adolescent, but it comes to a day in life that you need to become a man. And for me, it was very striking because I grew up like in this very rural neighborhood, and I had no idea what gay meant until I went to college. Honestly, sincerely, and so when I went to college, it was like, oh, that what we're doing when we were growing up, that was being gay or bisexual. Oh, that was very revealing to me, you know. And then I went back home, like, because I had to travel 2 hours from home to go to college and 2 hours back, and like how the world changed, literally in those 2 hours each way. And how I had to adapt and respond to that. And something that I was thinking here, like while I was listening to them about like relationships between fathers and sons as well, and it's something that I mentioned here in the poem, I think was very formative to me in relation to forming my own masculinity and my own working class backgrounds, that at some point in my life in the past, I think 8 years or somewhat, I became financially responsible for my father, and how that changed our relationship completely, because he worked all his life, but as his physical and mental health deteriorated, I had to step up and take care of him financially. And that put some strains on our relationship because he didn't want to accept, but I had to, you know, and how those relationships change when those things happen. When one of the men in the relationship, the father or the son, when health comes into play. So I think this is something that it goes unspoken oftentimes, or most times, I guess, and how illness strains those relationships. They can break the relationship, but they can remake the relationship to an extent, I guess.
Do you feel that it was remade, do you think? Or?
To an extent, I think for the first time we found a way of being together, like we remained together without having conversations. We never managed to have a conversation. We couldn't really talk, you know, but he accepted that I kind of became his father, and, you know, and he was the son. So there was an inversion there in who had to take care of who, naturally, or, you know, the culture expected. And we had to adjust and accept that our roles were those, you know, I was the father and he was the son. And we had to behave in a certain way. I was scolding him rather than the other way around, you know. And that was a way that we found some sort of peace in our relationship for the first time, I guess.
Yeah. Charles, you talk about going home, coming home from university, and I have the lines here somewhere. We're talking about yes, injustice and the bourgeoisie. How did that go down at home?
Actually, I guess it's based to some extent on a real incident where I was in a pub, and it just so happened that one of my close pals, Da, was also my football manager at the sort of local club, and I think I grew up in Glasgow, but went to university in Edinburgh, and I think I'd been in Edinburgh for about 3 weeks, but at that time, you know, it felt like I'd lived a different life there, and you're encountering different people and these things, and I came back with ideas that were not welcome, or at least you know, were questioned, and I think that the sort of necessary bring back down to reality, and then it comes, you start to think about straddling two different kinds of life, rather than, one being better than another.
It's even worse than coming home from Edinburgh with these fancy ice.
Well, exactly.
Something that kind of came up in one of Matthew's poems. The dramatist Jimmy Murphy was talking about. Now, this is on Marion Finnegan years ago, so I'm not revealing any secrets. But he talked about his father coming home drunk and wrecking the place, and physical violence towards his mother, towards the kids. And he said when his father was dying, he was in hospital, and Jimmy went into him, and he said that he started to question him. He said, maybe kind of a couple of weeks to live, and why did you do that? He said it wasn't uncommon where they were living. I mean, that's what men did. This, and his father didn't answer me. He turned his head away in the pillow. It was one of your poems addressed that, Matthew, as well. Yeah. Isn't it? The idea of the silence that descends in the house when the father comes home, and the father fills the house with a silence. Usually drink involved, or kind
of. In the book?
Yeah. Unless I'm getting mixed up.
I think you may.
You're Charles.
Maybe one of Charlie's.
Yours, Charles. Yeah, it is. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. I did that. That being a very, I think, common thing, that silence that pervades. But I guess also in terms of the idea of masculinity or something like that, was that I grew up in a house full of women, and therefore the presence of a male figure was, strange, and that it was sporadic, and was something that seemed to upset the balance that I had between myself and my sisters and my mother, and therefore I was always very aware of being different to them, but not quite knowing how to be, I guess. And then there's the intermittent presence of the male figure who you're trying to in some way relate to, but actually just like you said, cast a silence here certain spaces. Right.
So kind of moving on to the class side of the thing. I mean, this applies more to Charles and Matthew. Well, something kind of I'm very interested in. I was having a debate with a friend of mine who loathes the idea. He's an Irish language scholar. He loathes the idea of Ulster Scots, and I was having this argument with him. I was quoting Kathleen Jamie back at him last night on email. Kind of a Scottish poet who, so you guys both write in a kind of, what would you say? You're using the dramatic, but it is a language of its own, I think. And there's a kind of class dimension to that, I think. The idea of you're rescuing the spoken language from the gatekeepers of language, if you like. You say, well, that's the way you pronounce it. Well, that's not necessary. I mean, a lot of the words I know that you use pronunciations are archaic, they're Elizabethan, they're even sometimes Chaucerian. They go back. They're old forms, they're archaic forms, but they're not. Could you maybe talk a bit about that, Charles, with the idea, both of you, but the idea of English as something other than what it says in the Oxford English Dictionary?
There's a section in my book which is, it was developed by the poet Scott McKendry. It's called, he calls it Egypt, and his book Grub. There's some sections that are written in that. It actually looks like, it's basically, he has developed a phonetic writing system that is exactly particular to how people in the Shankill particularly speak. So that's why it looks really, 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 really strange. It almost looks like Russian on the page. It's very, very strange. And there's a bit in my book, the section where I had someone from that part of the world speaking, and I just kind of used dialect, kind of I dialect for it. And he was like, why don't I just translate it for you into Egypt. And I was like, oh, that'd be interesting, because then that would make an interesting note then at the back of the book as well. So, and it really does. It looks totally bizarre, like on the page. But it's funny. Whenever I first started reading Scott's work in the Egypt dialect, I needed the phonetic dictionary that he has. But now, whenever I read it, I'm so used to it. I can kind of.
Is that because your ears are attuned to it?
You have to. It makes you speak like you're from the Shankill when you read it aloud. It's totally bizarre. If you know what you're looking at, you can't not say it without sounding like Scott. And it's really charming, actually, I think. And it's like a way he's really kind of, I don't know, he's kind of, he talks about the Belfast rapper Jun Sue, and he was kind of the first one to kind of get beyond the cringe and just rap in a Belfast accent for like Belfast hip hop. Obviously, Kneecap and all came after that, and they're rapping in Irish as well as English. But Jun Sue kind of had this song called "I Was Born in Belfast," and he just raps. It's like a proper hip hop tune, and it's like we didn't think that was for us in Belfast. We were like, that's just too cringy. You know, that's for Americans. That's for English people. It's not for us. And he just went with it. And that was one of Scott's influences when he decided to kind of just lean into the dialect and then just go full blown with this Egypt phonetic writing system, which is basically speaking Shankillese.
Do you get pushback against it, or?
I mean, it's his translation. It's my words translated into his words, so I defer to him. But his book's been very well received. But yeah, he's the only one who's done it. There's no one else who's developed that system. It's just him. It's original to him.
I mean, I remember sort of reading James Patterson for the first time and going, somebody's writing poetry in a Newry accent.
Yeah.
You know, but it's more profound than that. He's actually hearing things. He's hearing things in the language and the pronunciation. I mean, people refer to people from Newry as Newry Nucks. Yeah, I always thought it was something to do with the accent. In actual fact, it's a cant word. It actually means thief, which is kind of Newry people don't like hearing that. Milan Kundera said that the struggle of people against power is a struggle of remembering against forgetting. And, you know, Charles, in your language is very much a kind of language of remembering, isn't it?
It's to an extent, it's the language of memory and living, but also the language in the present, which is to say that you don't really shake it off. And the things that I was trying to illustrate within the poems could only really be told in that way. And it would seem false otherwise. You know, I guess I spoke about it a bit in the past, was to say that, you know, there is no other way that I would feel true to write, because this is how I think and speak and how I understand the world around me, and therefore it makes sense for the poems to exist in that way.
It could they exist otherwise if you didn't write them? And then
I guess they wouldn't be the same poems then. And like, I think it's also, like you said, the balance between like what, you know, I forever try to resist the concept of Scots, because it seems to me to be something that homogenizes languages, but also something that language like mine has been, you know, rejected by. And to a large extent, the Scots project was something that was one that prioritised the sort of middle-class university reinvention of a language, but a sort of demotic or vernacular dialect for like a housing scheme in Glasgow was no part of that. In fact, it was frowned upon and has been frowned upon. And the reaction to that by, you know, Scots critics has also been the same. And I'm not just talking about my own writing, I'm talking about writing by other writers for urban parts of Scotland that maybe write in a similar way. I guess most people are familiar with, like, say, Irvin Welsh or James Kelman, Tom Leonard, people like that who are doing this thing, which, you know, is masculine in a sense, but working class in its essence, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're doing about sort of remembering as against forgetting. You know, the project is, if you like, to give the middle class, you know, sort of language spoken this way, forget all that sort of stuff that you spoke growing up. You know, it's not valid. Yeah. So in terms of class, I'm kind of interested in, you know, because you have scenarios like, you know, sort of landlords and all the kind of thing, you know, where you come up against in Ireland. I mean, I remember my brother-in-law, who's a DJ in a nightclub in the Midlands for a long time, and he dropped south was wonderful. He was from the north, and then all that went bust, and he got a job selling kind of paper towels around the back factory doors. And he said all of a sudden these people that I thought were lovely were, you know, rough, crude, dismissive, unpleasant. I mean, you write a bit about that. So what's your kind of sense of class in Ireland, if you like?
Like I have had so many jobs here. Like when I arrived in Ireland, I worked as a delivery driver for about 3 years, I think, and I worked in Gay Spar for about a year. If there is a heaven, I'm going there because I worked in Gay Spar Thursday through Sunday evenings. So how many gods are out there? If there is one God at least, I'm going to heaven. So I think my sense of class in Ireland was like very much indebted to those experiences of like working in Gay Spar, working as a delivery driver, working in Delhi in the port, living in Summerhill Parade. I remember when I arrived in Ireland, I didn't speak no English, so like I would go to Summerhill Parade to practice English, and people look at me like, "What are you doing here?" I'm like, "Yeah, and I know no better." So, and I think that's like, I think my experience of working class in Ireland comes from this place, and I think for me it's too shocking now that I understand what, like, for instance, being a PhD student at Trinity, what it means, because when I came to Trinity for the first time, like I had no idea because I'm not originally from here. And now that I understand, for me, it's really weird, you know, to navigate this space. I don't feel like I belong there, you know, but I also at the same time want to show some people that I do belong there. That for me is important. And I think, as I was saying, like these jobs that I had, this work class experience here was fundamental for me because this was what allowed me to take care of my dad back in Brazil. You know, if it wasn't for those like 2 jobs that I was literally working 2 jobs for many years here because I needed to pay my bills here and then like sustain him there. And that was really something that informed me. And something that you were saying, Charlie, like about the silence, I was really absolutely related to that. Like my case was just me and my mom, but I think it was, I don't know if you relate to that, but like there is the silence, but also the anxiety before the silence. You know, when you know that the person is coming, you know that your father is arriving, like you hear the car coming on the driveway, or you know that like the bus is about to come, and there's the anxiety. You don't know how that person is gonna show up, you know, and that like the both the anxiety and the silence is something that I think I find in your work, and I think that's I find my own work, but also this other thing that you were saying that. How can I distance myself from that type of masculinity? You know, how can I distance myself from that type of masculinity? I think it's a struggle, and that in my case, I think I will never finish this struggle. Like I will keep struggling with this question and try and distance myself from that example, that model, to the end of my life. You know, because these are the model that I have.
Yeah. I mean, I the poem where the man comes to the door, I have it here somewhere, and he says, "You're bullying me." I mean, this kind of brings kind of race into it, and you know, I mean, I always kind of felt that Ireland said, "Well, we're not racist," and I always kind of felt, but you haven't had anything to form your racism around. Wait till you get a chance, and now you've got the chance. But perhaps you talk about that poem, or even if you read some of it, kind of second stanza of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I can. Well, let's see if I can find. I'll. Yeah, I'm gonna reach just a stanza. It's from a poem called "Threaten." So it goes like this: to cause someone to feel insecure or anxious. It's 4 p.m. A white middle-aged Irishman rings the door of the cultural institution where Ulysses works. Despite being ashamed of his crooked teeth, he smiles, jokes that it's always raining in Ireland, even when it's not, and provides the information he's asked for. Suddenly, the gentleman asks, "Why are you threatening me?" Ulysses feels like he's been deceived, Truman Show style, as he says, "I'm sorry, sir." He takes in the room, searching for cameras. "How am I threatening you?" Waiting for his friends to appear with a late birthday cake. Just the way you move your body, the way you position your body, the way you speak, your hair. And that it actually happened, like that's word by word. And I was shocked because when the man told me that I was threatening him, I couldn't really understand. I was like, did I miss something? Like I don't speak English like well enough. That's something that I'm missing there. And this is the way like that racism happens in Ireland here, and something that really infuriates me. Anytime I hear anyone saying that there's no racism in Ireland, no, racism happens in America because they shoot black people on the streets. So okay, so racism will exist in Ireland the day that the guards start shooting people on the streets. Up until then, there's no racism. And that absolutely infuriates me. And I bring this up every time that I have the opportunity because I think we need to acknowledge the fact that there is a racism in Ireland, and we need to distance ourselves from this comparison because it is disgraceful.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's a difficulty, Matthew, maybe you kind of think about this, of which you do very successfully. In fact, it was a difficulty of incorporating politics into poetry and where they meet. I mean, there are a few kind of references in yours to and it's a word I'm kind of very used to. Reference to the I presume the guy you worked with who worked in Afghanistan. Maybe you sort of say what his job was. Maybe talk a bit about that.
Yeah. So there's a working in that environment in the factory. It was mostly male orientated. Obviously, there was some women, but they basically worked in the offices. So on the floor, it was mostly men, and just the the casual everything, casual racism, sexism, misogyny. But this one particular guy, he was clearly, he did a tour in Afghanistan and he just was carrying stuff from that. But he also got mixed up with paramilitaries as well, kind of like, easy prey, if you like. Yeah, I mean, I could read that wee dialogue
please,
from it, which features him. This actually happened to me, but I put the words in his mouth. It's kind of intensely dramatic kind of dialogue poem, but it kind of it speaks to the silence, that kind of silence between males whenever there's this kind of unspoken machoism or machismo that's trying to be worn like a shield or an armor, which is always flimsy. But you only realise that when you start to get a bit older and start to just think about the world and read. So this is 3 minutes past, or 9:03 p.m. What about that story of Mushroom Mansions? I asked Tommy. Your old flats, your man Graham who lived below you. The streaming trees of my lungs woke me, he replies, and I rang the fire brigade, and I knocked, the neighbours awake, and I stood with the others in the early hours of early summer, feeling the inherited heat of yesterday under my socks, the tarmac infused with sunlight twice removed, since what we feel is already the past, all of us in our night clothes, pyjamas, t-shirts, trackies, flip-flops, bare feet, watching the flames in the flat below mine creak and crack and form those evil faces people think they see in the smoke of disasters. And who's to say this one was any different, since Graham was still inside sleeping as the fire brigade arrived and began rigging the water, voluntary Dantes stepping up through the circular levels to him, unconscious now inside and dreaming of a light getting brighter and brighter, or dimmer and dimmer. And even those christened with youthful names must bear them into the future, I thought. Graham, who more than once misidentified me in darkness through acid eyes, a carload arriving at my door, the head honcho recognizing me from school from behind his Chelsea scarf and pulling the plug and disappearing from whatever history remained between us. So it's that kind of unresolvedness that, like, why did that happen? Why was the history never addressed? Why did you not say to him, why are you here to do me damage? Just let it go and then you move on and it just evaporates, but never really evaporates,
Yeah, Charles. I mean, my wife rang my daughter and said, do you want to go along to your dad's gig? And, 4 blokes, by the way, but that was delivered. And she said she works as a sports journalist, and she said, I see enough masculinity all week, Is there a sense when you write about these things that you alienate half your audience? Is there... One of the odd thing about my own latest book is, I mean, it is so much of it is about men and a particular kind of masculinity. It's not about that, but it kind of comes into it. I was doing an event in Belfast, and people were buying the books, and it was like 2 days before Father's Day, and people, particularly women, were saying, "I'm buying this for my dad," But if you write, if you embrace the kind of those masculine things too much, is it that you alienate women, if you like? Or do you do that kind of thing where they actually want to know, what the hell's going on in your head?
I sincerely hope that it does not alienate anybody. I think the sports poems in particular, which are mostly, if not all, but football, is because there's a certain element of class in that, I guess, which is to say that when I made that long journey on the train through to Edinburgh, the interest in football that I had and always had was I was consciously trying to shake that off. I pretended I wasn't interested in it and things like that. And then I guess when I came around to writing the book, I thought that this was such an important part of my life, and up until I was 18 I played football, and it was also how I guess understood masculinity, which is to say that the coaches and the other boys and my team were some of the only, I guess, men in my life at that time, and therefore, that's how masculinity develops. And also, I guess, to a certain extent, it was a sort of selfish way of sort of reclaiming some of that, which is to say that, it's not something to be ashamed of, particularly that interest in football. But I guess I hope that there is something there that people can get something from, even if they don't seem to understand it. There's maybe more beyond the masculine that only men can see, and hopefully there's another level of depth there that maybe people are willing to probe. Certainly that was never ever my intention, but I hope that's not the case.
You have a lovely line, Raphael, and I think it's probably a way to we'll ask some questions after. Are we okay time-wise? But it's just italicized line in the first poem. Go on, son, go on, brother. And kind of the idea of men urging each other on.
Yeah, I do feel that there like this line of men like supporting me on the one hand. I was actually thinking about what I was going to talk here, and I started writing this poem and like thinking about this long line, this lineage of men from whom I come from. This line of like this lineage from working class men who happen to be bad husbands and more or less good fathers, or to an extent good fathers, but really bad husbands. And on how, the one hand, I want to keep this lineage, but on the other hand, I don't want to keep this lineage. And how I want to be with them, but I don't want to be them. And I think for me, for many years, the question, I was assured that I was meant to be like them. There was no way that I could escape that I would be just a replica of them. And it took me maybe like almost 30 years to understand that that wasn't my fate, that I could change, that wasn't my destiny, and to be like them if I put the work. And that's the hope that they can chant and they can support me, but I don't need to be like them. And that's what I try to do, I guess.
Do you feel like you left something valuable behind you, or are you reconciled to that? If you left something valuable behind you when you moved out of their orbit, if you like, to the circus?
Yes. Like, I think for me, like my brother's in the audience, and he moved to Ireland like 3 weeks ago. And I think since our dad passed away, we joke with each other that I'm his son and he's my dad, and I'm his father and he's my son. So like we are being father and son together now. And I think for me, what I want to leave behind, or like what I'm concerned about, is like how I can be an example for him to an extent, because I know that he looks up to me, and that like whatever type of masculinity I perform is a type of masculinity that doesn't show or doesn't understand or doesn't believe that love can be demonstrated through violence, that love and violence are not one and the same. That's something that is paramount for me.
Okay, thank you, Rafael. Anyone got any questions? Gentleman here. Do you want to sit?
Worked with a man called Maladon Some, who was from Burkina Faso, and he had 2 doctoral theses in psychology, UCLA and the Sorbonne. And he was educated by Jesuits, or captured by Jesuits with his home base, and that's how he got that kind of education. What he said, there was nothing in psychology or in academia that he hadn't learned from the tribe. And his big journey was to go back to the tribe. And he said it's a difficult thing to be initiated as a man in your 20s when you've missed out on that. The question I want to ask you is, and one that I struggle, because I do learn a lot from what people research and different theories and all of that. How do you reconcile both? And let's say with Kavanagh, the man who knows his own half acre, knows the world, stay at home if he could maybe mind the same depths. So that's the question. It's not denigrating either, but it's just how do you, because you said, I like that, I belong here as well. And I love the expression of wearing the night clothes, that sometimes as men, you have to get out of the night clothes and wake up. And I do think there's a huge responsibility on me as a man to move to my father and not always expect of him, because I don't know what he's carrying.
Who wants to run with that? Rafael, do you?
So can you repeat the question?
It's just about academia, in the sense that, there are many theories. We learn a lot about academia and masculinity, but also true. He said that he went back to his tribe.
Okay.
And the rituals that the tribe had. For example, one was that the men gathered their children, or their boys, and the women folk gathered their girls, and they stood at either side of the compound and they roared. It could have been abuse, could have been anything at each other, but they cleansed the air and they sat down and they ate together.
My response, it's very clear. Like I'm finishing my PhD now, but it doesn't mean like honestly anything, because the people who taught me the most barely went to school, and my dad, my uncles, my aunties, my mom, my grandmother, these are the people who taught me the most, and they didn't go to school, they didn't go to university. I'm the first person in my family, and I come from a really big family. I have like 40 plus cousins. The first person to go to the university, it's me, and I go back to them if I want to learn something. Like I do take whatever I learn in academia. But when I go to talk to them, I don't go, oh, I know a lot of stuff. No. I stay silent. I stay silent and learn from them. I ask them questions. I don't come with answers.
I guess it maybe comes back to an extent what we were maybe talking about before, about the one point that I have that is a journey towards university and then some kind of reflection thereafter. But I guess since I entered university, which was a while ago, and then latterly completed the PhD, the whole time there has been some kind of resistance to the fact that a working class person is in a university, which is to say that when you go to university, you either shed your working classness or you don't belong there. And for a long time, there's been I guess I've negotiated the two positions, but then came to the conclusion that, that both of them are the same thing, and there is no difference in any other kind of person, let alone a working class person, being in a university. And actually, perhaps like Rafael said earlier, we belong there just as much as anybody else. And I don't necessarily see it as being something that is worth commenting on as such.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of, learning and, silence and instruction, I learned a lot when I was 14 from an interaction between my granddad and my dad. My granddad lived in Cape Town from when he was 40 till he died, and he came over to visit one time, and him and my dad were sitting there, and my granddad had quite a bit to drink, and he started just being very casually racist about his experience in Cape Town. And my dad just shut him down, said, anyone who comes into my house and starts talking like that, I'll beat the ass out of them. I don't care who it is. And what followed was the most intense 10 minutes, but what seemed like an hour, but of my granddad just sitting staring at my dad, and my dad just sitting staring at the TV, and me just sitting looking at the two of them. And then my granddad eventually got up, went to the toilet, and went up the stairs to bed, and my dad just sat on looking at the TV in silence. And I learned a lot in that silence, Sometimes that can be the most instructive, for what it's worth.
I think we'll go with one more question. I think we're getting a bit short of time here. So anybody else got a question? Gentleman here.
I was interested, Charles. Well, firstly, I think I recognise you from the Edinburgh Poetry Library. So hello. But I was interested in you talking about growing up with a house full of women, in a house of women. And I'm curious about, and you said something about still having some, negative feedback from them. But how did that differ from the kind of, fearful sort of anxiety that men tend to generate in that situation?
I don't know, because it's difficult when you have one particular experience to see it through another experience, if you know what I mean. Which is to say, I guess I don't know what it would have been like necessarily to have that kind of negative feedback for a masculine figure or a male figure or something like that.
But you know about it in the world at large.
Aye, but I guess I'm not necessarily in a position where I can generalise in such a way, because my experience is very specific to me. Where there was friction between my mother and me, or my sisters and me, I think it almost always came when I was rehearsing or reinterpreting ideas of masculinity which I had perceived probably at school. In terms of how that works in the other way, is that when I was at school, people told me I behaved like a woman, And all through my adulthood, people have flagged up my lack of masculinity, as in other men have flagged up issues that I had with masculinity or no behaving as I should. So there's a tension, I guess, between both of these things. But I don't want to generalise in terms of saying this is how it is, but this was certainly how it was for me, I think.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'd like to thank Rafael, Charles, and Matthew for brilliant discussion and for some in-depth reading. I've gone through your work with these two words in my head, class and masculinity, and I came out a little wiser, but certainly kind of challenged. And I'd also like to thank our hosts of the library. Anna Akhmatova, the Russian poet in the height of the Stalinist terror, she would sit with friends in a room and she would write a scrap of a poem on a piece of paper. There's a candle burning at the end of the row of friends, and they would read it in silence. And then the one person at the end would put it in the candle and burn it because they were afraid of being caught with this material. And for a long time, small presses have been that in Ireland. So it's brilliant to see them thriving. So thank you all very much.